He walked into the church at 2:47 in the afternoon, 3 minutes before she was supposed to become someone else's wife, and the room went silent the way rooms only go silent when something irreversible is about to happen. Tatum Ashe had spent 11 months planning a perfect wedding. The peonies were blush and ivory. The string quartet had been rehearsed twice. Her dress had taken 4 fittings to get right, structured at the top, soft at the hem, the kind of dress her mother cried when she saw it. Everything was exactly where it was supposed to be. And then Shin Yoo-jin opened the doors. He didn't rush. He didn't announce himself. He simply walked down the center aisle in a black suit that probably cost more than the entire venue, and 200 guests turned in their seats like a single organism responding to a threat it couldn't name. You know that feeling when someone enters a space and the air changes before you understand why. That was him. That was every room he'd ever walked into. Tatum saw him from the altar. Her hands, which had been perfectly still, went cold. Bryce, standing across from her, followed her eyes. His jaw tightened. Something moved across his face, not a surprise, not confusion. Something older than both of those things. Something that looked, if you were watching closely enough, like fear. Yoo-jin stopped 10 feet short of the altar. The pastor had gone still. The string quartet had stopped mid-bow. Someone in the third pew made a sound that wasn't quite a word. Yoo-jin looked at Bryce. Just looked at him, the way a man looks at something he's already decided to take apart. Then he turned to Tatum. His voice, when it came, was quiet, almost gentle, which somehow made it worse. Asterisk, get away from him. Asterisk. 3 words. No explanation. No apology. And here is what nobody in that room understood yet. Not the guests, not Meredith in her sage bridesmaid dress, not even Tatum herself. He hadn't come to stop a wedding. He'd come to stop a funeral. If you're new here, welcome. And you picked the right day to show up. Stories like this one are what we do here, cinematic, emotional, the kind that make you forget you're watching YouTube. Hit that subscribe button so you don't miss what happens next. And drop a comment. Where are you watching from? I want to know who stayed for this. Now, let me take you back to where this actually started. 6 weeks before the wedding, Tatum Ashe was working late. This was not unusual. The paralegal office on the 14th floor of Callaway and Cross Partners had fluorescent lights that flickered every time the HVAC kicked on, and Tatum had learned in 3 years of late nights exactly which ones to sit under. She kept 2 pairs of reading glasses, one on her desk, one in her bag, and a travel-sized Tylenol in her top drawer. She had long ago made peace with the fact that she was the person who stayed until the work was done. She was cross-referencing a land deed. Her father's land deed, technically, a 14-acre parcel in rural Georgia that he'd left her when he died 4 years ago. She was finally moving to transfer the title fully into her name before the wedding, tying off the last loose administrative thread of her old life before starting a new one. She didn't know, sitting there under the flickering fluorescent, that this document was the reason she was going to be in danger before the month was out. She didn't know a lot of things. What she knew was that Bryce had called twice that evening, and she'd let both calls go to voicemail. They'd had an argument that morning, a minor one, she told herself, about the seating chart. He'd been sharp with her in a way that felt slightly off, like a note played a half-step flat. She'd shaken it off. People got stressed before weddings. She knew this. She finished the deed, shut her laptop, and took the elevator down to the parking deck. The parking deck on level B2 was half empty at this hour. Her heels clicked across the concrete in an even rhythm. She was thinking about what to eat when she got home. She was thinking about calling her sister Dara back. She was thinking essentially about nothing dangerous. And then she heard it. 2 men. An argument, low and vicious, the kind that happens when people have moved past the point of wanting to be understood and are operating purely on consequence. She couldn't see them yet. She slowed without meaning to, that animal instinct that tells you to stop making noise before your brain catches up. She rounded the pillar. 3 men. One of them was on his knees. 2 of them were standing, one broad and expressionless, the other facing away from her in a black suit that absorbed every shadow in the parking deck like it was designed to. The man in the suit said something in Korean. Low, unhurried, final, and then he turned around. He looked at her the way you look at something you weren't expecting and have already calculated, in under a second, as if the data had been processed before his eyes fully finished the motion. Tatum did not scream. She was not the kind of woman who screamed. She took one step back. He held up a hand. Not threatening. Something closer to wait. You didn't see anything, he said. His English was exact. No accent. Just precision. Tatum looked at the man on his knees, then back at the man in the suit. Then she said, because she was at her core a woman who processed danger through logic. That's going to be very difficult to forget. Something happened at the corner of his mouth. Not quite a smile. More like the recognition of something unexpected. I know, he said. That's the problem. She made it to her car. She drove home with her hands locked on the wheel, and didn't breathe properly until she hit the highway. She told herself it was nothing. She told herself she'd imagined the weight of his gaze. She had not imagined it. And neither had he. He found her 3 days later. She was at the coffee shop 2 blocks from her office, the one with the cracked tile near the counter and the best oat milk latte in a 6-block radius. She had her laptop open. She was not thinking about the parking deck. She had decided, firmly and rationally, not to think about the parking deck. He sat down across from her without asking. She looked up. Then she looked back at her screen with the specific kind of stillness that means a person is using all of their control. I don't know who you are, she said. Shin Yoo-jin. He set a business card on the table between them. She didn't touch it. I run a development company. We have interests in the property sector, particularly in rural Georgia. Her hands stopped moving over the keyboard. She turned her head slowly. I'm going to need you to say that again. Your father's deed. He didn't flinch from her look. 14 acres in Walton County. The title transfer you filed last week. I'm aware of it. Why? It wasn't a question. It was an accusation. He leaned back slightly, not retreat, just patience. Because someone else is also aware of it. And their interest in that property is not the kind that ends with a transaction. Tatum closed her laptop. She looked at him fully for the first time. He was unsettling in a way she couldn't quantify. Not loud, not physically threatening, but occupying his side of the table as if he owned the table, the floor beneath it, and everything connected to both. His stillness wasn't passive. It was the stillness of something that had already decided. Are you threatening me? She asked. I'm informing you. Is there a difference? Yes, he said. A threat comes from someone who needs something from you. I don't need anything from you. She studied him. Then why are you here? He was quiet for a moment. Long enough that she understood the pause was deliberate. Because you walked away from something in that parking deck and didn't call the police. And in my experience, the kind of woman who does that either knows better or understands that some problems are bigger than police reports. And which one am I? He picked up his card from the table and slid it into his jacket pocket. He stood. I haven't decided yet. He left. She sat there for a long moment with her cold coffee and her beating heart, and she told herself again that this was nothing to do with her. She had a wedding in 5 weeks. She had a fiancé who loved her. She had a life that was neatly arranged and carefully built, and she was not going to let one encounter in a parking deck unravel any of it. She pulled out her phone and looked up at Shin Yoo-jin. The results loaded slowly. Then all at once, she set the phone face down on the table. The problem, she would realize later, wasn't finding out who he was. The problem was finding out who he was and still wanting to know more. He called her at 9 p.m. She answered. She told herself afterward it was because she'd been expecting a call from Dara. She'd been expecting it so hard that she didn't check the name on the screen before pressing accept. She maintained this version of events for exactly 48 hours before she stopped bothering. Someone approached your fiancé this week, Yoo-jin said. No greeting. A man named Choi Sung-grak. He runs a financial faction connected to your father's county, specifically to the parcel your deed covers. He has been trying to acquire that land for 2 years. Tatum sat up in her bed. The room felt very still. Why are you telling me this? Because Bryce Langford agreed to a meeting. The silence stretched. That doesn't mean anything, she said. He attended the meeting, Tatum. The first time he used her name, it landed differently than she expected. Direct. Like a hand on a shoulder. He's been in contact with Choi's people for 4 months. Before your engagement was announced. Before the title transfer. She felt the floor shift under something she'd been standing on. What do you want? She asked. Her voice was level. She was proud of it. I want to make an arrangement, he said. You let me place 2 of my people inside your firm, as a contractor and a courier. I use your access to certain property records to track Choi's acquisitions legally. In exchange, I make sure that the deed your father left you doesn't disappear, and I make sure that nothing happens to your sister. Her breath caught. What does Dara have to do with any of this? Nothing yet, he said. Let's keep it that way. She stood up from the bed and walked to the window. Atlanta at night, all lit orange and indifferent. She looked at it and thought about her father, who had spent 15 years paying taxes on land he never developed because he believed it would matter to someone eventually. She thought about Bryce, who had held her hand at the closing ceremony when she officially filed the transfer, who had said your dad would be proud with his eyes a little wet and his hand warm against hers. For months. For months before the engagement. If I say no, she asked, then I walk away and you handle this however you see fit. You're not obligated to me. You never were. She pressed her forehead against the cold glass. And if I say yes? Then you have my word, Eugene said, that no one touches what's yours. The silence that followed was the kind that rewrites something. She felt it happening. She tried to stop it and couldn't. 2 people, she said. And I want documentation of everything Choi has done. Everything. Not summaries. Evidence. A pause. Agreed. And you don't contact me at my office. Understood. And we're done the moment this is over. The pause this time was different. Almost imperceptible. Understood, he said again. She hung up the phone. She stood at the window for a long time. She had just made a deal with the most dangerous man she'd ever met to protect a piece of land her dead father left her from a fiancé who may have been lying to her for the entirety of their relationship. She thought about calling the police. Then she thought about what Eugene had said about the kind of woman who didn't call the police. She went back to bed. She did not sleep. Okay, I need you to take a breath with me for 1 second, because the layers of this story are only getting deeper from here. If you're not subscribed yet, do it right now. You do not want to lose this video and then not be able to find it again because trust me what's coming in the next few chapters. You are not ready. Subscribe. And drop a comment. Do you trust Eugene yet? She expected him to be transactional. She was prepared for that. She had built a wall shaped exactly like this is a business arrangement, and she was comfortable behind it. She was not prepared for the apricot tree. It was a Tuesday, 10 days into the arrangement. Eugene's contractor, a quiet, efficient man named Ji-hoon, had settled into the firm without so much as a ripple. Tatum had managed to forget most mornings that any of this was unusual. She was good at compartmentalizing. It was one of her better skills. She was eating lunch on the firm's rooftop when Eugene appeared. He had a habit of arriving without announcement that she was beginning to recognize as deliberate, not rudeness, but the assessment of how people responded when they didn't have time to prepare. She looked at him over her container of leftover rice. This is my office. Rooftop, he said. Technically shared space. He sat down across from her without invitation. This too she was beginning to recognize. She didn't say anything. She ate her rice. He looked at the skyline. Then, there's an apricot tree on the eastern edge of your father's property. Ji-hoon sent aerial shots this morning. It's mature, probably 60-70 years old. Center of the parcel. She went still. Choi's development plan levels everything east of the tree line, he continued. His original filing called for a road through the middle of the property. It would have gone directly through where the tree is standing. Tatum set down her fork. She looked at the skyline so he wouldn't see her face. My father planted that tree the year he married my mother, she said. He told me it was the first thing that was really his. Eugene didn't say anything immediately. In anyone else this would have been uncomfortable. In him it felt like respect. I know, he said finally. She turned. How? Property records include improvement filings. He filed a horticultural record when he planted it, had it officially registered as a heritage specimen, so it couldn't be removed without county approval. He looked at her. He was protecting it. He knew, even when he filed the original deed, that someone might eventually try to take the land. She felt something press against the inside of her chest. He never told me that. Sometimes people protect things quietly, Yoo-jin said, without making a production of it. She studied him, really looked at him, not as a threat, not as a variable, but as a person sitting across from her with the city behind him and something careful in his expression. Is that what you do? He looked at her for a long moment, long enough that she felt the weight of it somewhere specific. Sometimes, he said. She picked up her fork again. She didn't have anything to say that felt adequate, so she said nothing. They sat in a silence that was no longer tense. It was something else entirely. Later on the elevator down, she thought about the way he'd said sometimes with such economy, such exactness. Like every word he ever used had been chosen from a much longer list. She thought about it longer than she should have. And she thought about Bryce, who said everything beautifully and meant so little of it. She didn't let herself finish that thought. Not yet. Choi Sung-rak made his play on Thursday. Not at Tatum. That wasn't how men like Choi operated. They didn't go for the target directly, they went for the thing around the target. The thing the target couldn't afford to lose. Dara was leaving her hospital clinical rotation at 7 p.m. when two men fell into step beside her. They didn't touch her. They didn't have to. One of them said, quietly and pleasantly, that her sister had a decision to make about a piece of property in Walton County, and that the easiest version of the outcome was one where she made it voluntarily and soon. Dara called Tatum from the hospital lobby with her hands shaking. Tatum called Yoo-jin before the call with Dara was even finished. He answered on the first ring. She told him in 12 words what happened. She had spent her entire adult life managing her emotions, processing them quietly and efficiently, and never at a volume that inconvenienced anyone. She managed it now for exactly the length of time it took to relay the facts. Then her voice cracked. Just once. Just the edge of it. She's 24, she said. She has nothing to do with any of this. I know, Yoo-jin said. This was your assurance. You told me. I know. Something in his tone made her stop. Where is she right now? He asked. Still at the hospital. I told her to stay inside. Good. Ji-hoon is already on his way. A pause. Tatum. Look at me. You're not in the room, she said. Look at your phone, he said. I'm here. She looked at the screen. He'd sent a location pin. Not a destination, a presence. Here. Just that. She exhaled through her nose. What are you going to do? Handle it. That's not an answer. It's the only one that matters right now, he said. Get to your sister. Let Ji-hoon bring you both somewhere safe. And don't go home tonight. Yoo-jin. Tatum. His voice didn't rise. It never rose. But it arrived, it filled the space it was in. I gave you my word. She pressed her lips together. Then she grabbed her bag and ran. Ji-hoon was already outside the hospital when she got there. Dara was shaken but unhurt. They were taken to a mid-rise apartment in Midtown that looked like a perfectly ordinary rental and had, Tatum noticed, reinforced window glass and two men in plain clothes in the lobby. She sat on the couch with Dara's head in her lap and stroked her hair and kept her voice even for 2 hours. Then Dara fell asleep, and Tatum sat in the dark kitchen and let herself shake. Yoo-jin texted at midnight. Choi's people have been delivered a message. They won't approach her again. She stared at the screen. What kind of message? He took 3 minutes to respond. The kind they'll remember. She put the phone down. She stared at the ceiling. She thought about what she was doing, who she was doing it with, and what it meant about her that she felt, for the first time in weeks, like her sister was actually safe. She didn't like what that said about her. She chose to examine it later. She fell asleep at the kitchen table with her phone in her hand. When she woke at 5 a.m., there was one more message from him. Get some sleep. It had been sent at 3 a.m. She didn't know how long he'd been awake. She thought, against her will, about what it meant that he'd been thinking about her at 3 a.m. She told herself it was nothing. She was getting very tired of telling herself that. She confronted Bryce on a Friday evening, 9 days before the wedding. She had planned the conversation carefully. She had the timeline Ji-hoon had compiled, clinical, documented, laid out in chronological order. She had the meeting records. She had dates that predated their engagement by 16 weeks. She sat across from Bryce at the dining table in his apartment, poured herself a glass of water, and set everything in front of him. He looked at it for a long time. Then he looked at her. Then he said, "Where did you get this?" "Not that's not true. Not let me explain. Just, where did you get it?" "Does that matter?" she asked. "Yes," he said. "Because whoever gave it to you has their own agenda. And you don't." He leaned back. Something in his posture changed, the performance of sincerity dropped just slightly, just enough. She saw it. She had been a paralegal for 3 years, and she knew what it looked like when someone shifted from feeling to managing. "Tatum, I am trying to build something for us. That land, the development on it, it's an investment in our future." "That land is my father's," she said. "It's a field," he said. "It's overgrown and it's not doing anything for anyone. There is an apricot tree on that property that my father planted before I was born and registered as a heritage specimen so that no one could touch it." Her voice was very steady. She was proud of herself for that. He did that quietly, without telling anyone, because he knew something might happen to it, and he wanted it to survive. Bryce stared at her. "You've known about this land since before you proposed to me," she said. "You sat with me when I filed the title transfer, and you cried a little and you said my father would be proud." She picked up her water glass. "Which part of that was real?" A long pause. "I love you," he said. "That didn't answer my question." He looked at the table. He looked like a man doing arithmetic, adding up what she knew against what he could still save. "The situation with Choi, it got complicated. I owe him money. Real money. The kind that doesn't go away. When I found out about your land, I thought there was a way to solve both problems at once and no one would have to get hurt." Her voice cracked slightly on the last word. "Not in grief. In disbelief. You were going to hand over my father's land to settle your debt. You were going to marry me and then tell me afterward? Or never?" He didn't answer. She stood up. "Tatum. Don't." She picked up the folder. She looked at him, really looked the way you look at something you're trying to memorize before it disappears or before you do. "I spent 3 years learning to read people in depositions. Witnesses who lie always have the same tell. They answer the question they wish you asked instead of the one you actually asked." She picked up her bag. "You've been doing that our entire relationship." She left his apartment with her glass of water still on the table. She drove 4 blocks and then pulled over. She sat in the car and breathed. In through the nose, out through the mouth. The way you do when the ground is gone and you're trying to locate something solid. Outside, Atlanta moved around her, indifferent and continuous. "She is called Eugene." He answered before the second ring. She didn't say anything right away. He didn't either. He just waited, like he had all the time there was. Finally she said, "I ended it." "I know," he said. "How?" "I have people near his building. They told me when you left." She should have found this unsettling. She noted, with the last functioning analytical part of her brain, that she did not. "Eugene." "Yes. Thank you. For the tree." He was quiet. Then, "Your father knew what he was doing." "So did you," she said. The silence between them was different now. Not transactional. Not careful. Just 2 people sitting in the dark on either end of a phone call, both of them aware that something had shifted and neither of them willing to name it first. "Go home," he said. "Not his apartment. Yours." "I know. And eat something." She laughed. Just briefly, just barely. Surprised her. "You sound like my mother." "I will never say that again," he said, dry and exact, and she laughed again, and it felt like the first clean breath she'd taken in weeks. She drove home. She ate leftover rice at her counter. She did not think about Eugene at all. She thought about nothing else. She kept the wedding. She knew this was going to require an explanation, and she gave it to Meredith, to Dara, to the 7 other people who absolutely had to know, in the most composed version of herself she could locate. She wasn't ready to blow up everything publicly. She needed 30 more days. She needed the title transfer to finalize fully, the documentation from Ji-hoon to clear through the firm's legal process, and Choi's exposure to be locked into the record before Bryce had time to react to any of it. Yoo-jin had agreed with the strategy. He'd laid it out in his unhurried, surgical way over coffee in a different coffee shop, one he'd chosen with a table in the back because, of course, she'd made a joke about his very specific seating preferences. He'd looked at her with that corner of the mouth almost smile and said, "It's not a preference, it's a practice." She'd filed that line away somewhere she wasn't going to examine. The betrayal came from somewhere she hadn't been looking. It was Meredith. Not a full betrayal, not a calculated one, not a malicious one. Meredith, in her anxiety and her genuine love for Tatum and her inability to hold complicated information without doing something with it, had called Bryce 3 days before the wedding. She told him that she knew about Choi. She told him that Tatum had been working with someone to build a case. She hadn't meant to arm him. She was trying to give him a chance to confess and fix it. Bryce had used the 48 hours of warning to do something else entirely. He filed an emergency motion to contest the title transfer. He cited a technical irregularity in the original deed, one that had existed for 30 years and been overlooked and meant nothing, but the filing froze the transfer. Just long enough. Tatum found out at 7 a.m. on the morning before her wedding when her firm's system flagged the motion. She sat at her kitchen table with her coffee getting cold, and felt the specific horror of a plan coming apart at a seam she hadn't checked. "She is called Eugene. He filed a contest," she said. "I know. He'd already seen it. Of course he had. He has a 48-hour window before it can be challenged. My wedding is tomorrow." The pause was brief. "I know. If I don't go through with it." "If you don't go through with it." He walks away from the arrangement with Choi with the filing as leverage, Eugene said. "He doesn't need the land transferred to him. He just needs it frozen. So I have to stand at that altar tomorrow." Silence. "Yes," he said. She closed her eyes. "And then what?" "And then I'll be there." She opened them. "Eugene, I need you to trust me for 24 more hours," he said. "Can you do that?" She thought about the rooftop, the apricot tree, the 3 a.m. text. She thought about a man who showed up to things quietly, without announcement, without need for credit. "Yes," she said. She got up. She went to get her dress from the closet. She didn't look at it for a long time. She just stood there in the morning light with her hand on the door of the closet, and let herself feel the full weight of the day she was walking into. Then she got dressed. Because Tatum Ashe did not flinch. Even when the floor was gone. Tomorrow she was going to find out what Eugene meant by "I'll be there." The morning of the wedding was beautiful. That was the part that was almost cruel. Soft October light, the kind that makes Atlanta look like a painting. Meredith had shown up at 6 a.m. with coffee and red eyes. She tried to explain herself and Tatum had held up a hand, gently, and said not today. Not because she wasn't hurt. Because she needed every piece of herself intact for what came next. Meredith, to her credit, understood. She did Tatum's hair in silence and did not let a single tear fall until the final pin was in. Dara arrived at 8. She looked at her sister in the mirror and her chin wobbled. "You look like Mom on her wedding day," Dara said. Tatum said, "I know." It was the only moment in the whole of that morning that she came close to breaking. Because her mother had looked beautiful too. And her mother's wedding had been the beginning of a very long, very quiet devastation. And Tatum had spent her entire adult life trying to choose differently, trying to choose stable, trying to choose safe. And she had ended up here in a wedding dress, walking into a ceremony she was only attending as a legal and strategic maneuver. She looked at herself in the mirror. Really looked. She thought, what have I been building my life around? Safe, stable, certain. Words she'd chosen in reaction to her mother's life. Words that had made her small. Words that had made her easy to calculate. She thought about the man who had shown up to a parking deck confrontation with absolute stillness and looked at her and said, "I haven't decided yet," as if she was a variable he was still trying to solve. She thought about how that had been the most honest thing anyone had said to her in years. She thought about him at 3 a.m. sending "Get some sleep." She straightened her back. She picked up her bouquet, blush and ivory peonies. "Okay," she said. They drove to the church in silence. Outside, the city was indifferent and luminous and continuous. She watched it through the car window and breathed. The church was full. 200 people who had no idea. She stood at the back of the narthex with Dara and Meredith on either side and listened to the string quartet begin, and thought, I don't know what's about to happen. She had spent her entire life needing to know, needing to plan, needing every step mapped before she took it. For the first time she let that go. She walked through the doors. Bryce was at the altar. He looked, she noted clinically, genuinely relieved to see her. He'd spent the last 24 hours uncertain, recalculating, and her appearance was confirmation to him that his plan had held. He smiled. It was a beautiful smile. He had a beautiful smile. She walked toward it with her chin up and her face perfectly composed. Pastor Ellison began. The words fell around her. She nodded at the appropriate moments. She breathed. She was present and she was elsewhere simultaneously, that particular dissociation that happens when you are doing something your body has been told to do while your mind stands slightly apart from it. And then the doors opened. 2:47 in the afternoon. 200 guests turned up as one. Shin Yoo-jin walked down the center aisle in a black suit that swallowed every shadow in the room. He didn't rush. He stopped 10 feet from the altar. The room was perfectly, absurdly silent. You could hear the wax dripping from the pillar candles. You could hear someone in the fourth pew draw a breath. Eugene looked at Bryce. Bryce looked at Eugene. In that look, in the exact shape of the fear that moved across Bryce's face, Tatum understood something she should have calculated sooner. Bryce didn't recognize Eugene as a rival. He recognized him as a consequence. Get away from him, Eugene said. His voice was quiet, exactly as quiet as it always was, which made it, in a church with perfect acoustics and 200 witnesses, the loudest thing in the room. Tatum looked at Eugene. Just looked at him. Then she looked at Bryce, who had gone the color of old paper and whose hands had gone to his jacket pockets in that particular fidgeting motion of a man thinking about exits. She stepped back from Bryce. One step. Deliberate and unhurried. Tatum. Bryce's voice broke slightly. She set her bouquet down on the altar step. She straightened up. The title contest you filed yesterday, she said, calmly, clearly into the silence, has already been challenged. The technical irregularity was reviewed and dismissed at 9 a.m. this morning. She looked at him. The transfer was finalized an hour ago. She watched him understand. Ji-hoon, she said. Ji-hoon appeared from a side door. He was carrying a document folder. He crossed to Pastor Ellison and handed it to him without a word. The pastor looked down at the papers with the expression of a man who has married 400 couples in 40 years, and is now in a situation he has never professionally trained for. Those are Choi Sung-grak's financial records, Tatum said to the room, not loudly, but with the measured delivery of someone who had done enough depositions to know exactly how to make a statement land, including documentation of the debt Bryce Langford agreed to settle using property belonging to my late father. Property he knew about before he proposed to me. Property he intended to transfer without my knowledge after the wedding. The room made a sound. Not words. Just sound. The collective intake of 200 people revising the last year of events simultaneously. Bryce said her name once more. She picked up her bouquet. She turned toward the aisle. She walked toward Eugene. He watched her come. He did not move. He stood there at the end of that center aisle with his hands at his sides and his stillness absolute. And he watched her walk through the silence of 200 people and the broken remnants of a plan she had built badly and a life she had been choosing out of fear. And when she reached him she stopped. She looked up at him. He looked down at her. He said, quiet enough that only she could hear. Are you all right? She thought about it. She thought about the apricot tree. She thought about 3 a.m. She thought about a man who showed up without announcement and protected things quietly, without needing credit. Ask me again tomorrow, she said. Something moved in his eyes. Not quite a smile, but the architecture of one, the shape of something settling into place. He offered her his arm. She took it. They walked out of the church together into the soft October light while 200 people sat in stunned silence and Bryce Langford stood at an altar alone with a truth he'd built his entire plan around trying to outrun. Choi Sung-grak was arrested 40 minutes later. Bryce Langford, faced with the documented evidence and 2 conversations with Eugene's attorneys, did not contest the deed. The title was Tatum's. The tree was Tatum's. The land was Tatum's. The rest of it, the rest of everything was still being written. 3 months later, Tatum Ashe stood on 14 acres of winter brown grass in Walton County, Georgia, and looked at an apricot tree. It was older than she'd imagined, thicker-trunked, more gnarled, its bare branches reaching in every direction the way things reach when they've had decades of uninterrupted space to decide their own shape. She could see where her father had staked it when it was young. The stake was still in the ground 40 years later, rotted to a nut but still there. She thought about all the things he had done quietly. Shin Yoo-jin stood a few feet behind her. He had driven her out here without being asked. He did not say anything for a long time. He was good at that, at being present without requiring anything from the silence. He would have liked you, she said finally. A pause. Why? Because you protect things without making a production of it. He came to stand beside her. He looked at the tree. She looked at him looking at the tree. The firm wants to build a small preserve around this parcel, she said. Conservancy designation. No development, no contest. Just land. I know, he said. I reviewed the filing. She looked at him. Of course you did. He met her eyes. That corner of the mouth expression, the almost smile she had catalogued, without meaning to, from every angle. Tatum. Yes. Ask me tomorrow, he said. Took her a second. Then she understood. He was returning her line. The one she'd said in the church doorway, walking out of everything she'd built wrong toward something she hadn't yet named. She looked back at the tree. At the bare branches and the old stake and the 60 years of uninterrupted, protected growth. Okay, she said. The wind moved through the winter grass. The tree stood exactly where her father had planted it. Both of them, the tree and the two people standing before it, exactly where they were always going to end up. I need a second with you before you go because this one got me. Tatum didn't get a grand rescue. She got the truth and she chose herself. And Yoo-jin, he didn't fight for her. He just showed up. Quietly. Over and over without needing to be asked. If this story hit you the way it hit me writing it, please subscribe. New stories drop every week and I refuse to ever waste your time. Like this video so more people find it. And leave a comment. I genuinely want to know. What was the moment you knew Yoo-jin was already in love with her? Was it the apricot tree? Was it 3 a.m.? Or did you know before even he did? I'll be reading every single one.